Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other Friday to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
How are the two of you doing?
Good. Things are clicking along. RJ, how are you?
Along?
You shared so much, Sarah. I really feel like I have this deep sense of
I live in a constant
state
of having a paper planner where things don't get done and being overwhelmed and moving it to the next day. And, most of the time I can't breathe. But I'm good. Things are great.
I'm feeling that. I'm feeling the never-ending to-do list a little bit, besides just having 3 kids and helping my son, look over his college application essays and, wrestling a 3-year-old, and I feel you. I feel you. Kind of the novelty of being back to school has worn off, and now we're just in it. Here we are in mid-October.
Now we're in it for a long time.
Yeah, till Thanksgiving at least, and then
Girl,
Christmas,
till Thanksgiving, till May. I get a breather, and then I'm back at it. What are you talking about, Thanksgiving? I got them with me at Thanksgiving.
I think my kids all get a week off at Thanksgiving. So
they all do,
nice.
But that means we got to deal with them. Okay.
Now I can sleep in a little bit. All right,
Dave,
enough of that. Dave, how are you?
Well, I'm great. I echo what you're saying. I think the common image is that you get on like a roller coaster at the beginning of September and it kind of just doesn't end for a long time. And maybe you get a break at Christmas. If you're a person who works at a church, forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
But this first piece we're going to talk about actually says that we kind of prefer it this way, that this sort of nonstop, unremitting activity is more comfortable than maybe downtime. This was written by Jonathan Malezich, who's a wonderful writer and used to be a college professor. And, whenever you tell someone you're a professor or a teacher, they say, oh, you get summers off. How awesome is that? And he just admits that was actually much more difficult for him, not because he doesn't want to take a rest, but because he felt that he couldn't. His state of mind was afflicted by what he calls acedia. Now, this is an old term, old sort of Christian term, in fact, the demon of acedia, in fact, which is known as the noonday demon. This was relatively fresh for me. I'd heard a little bit of talk about it. Acedia is from the Greek. It means a lack of care, but manifests itself as an inner emptiness, a state of restlessness, of not living in the present and seeing the future as overwhelming. And in the Middle Ages, it was turned into the sin of sloth, which is not the sin that we get to talk about very often. Anyway, Kathleen Norris, one of your heroes, Sarah, wrote about acedia. She wrote a whole book about it. She talks about episodes of acedia as episodes of inertia that spread into a bleak stretch of anxiousness and eventually spin out into indifference. She writes that we appear to be anything but slothful, yet that is exactly what we are as we do more and care less and feel pressured to do still more. And yet trying to talk about acedia is like trying to define a negative or grab a shadow, and yet that's what Jonathan Malezich is trying to do in the Plough Quarterly in this essay, The Noonday Demon. He says that the acedia, the chief place it drives him to, and still does, is online. That Facebook, Twitter, these are the places we go. They're fueled by acedia. Acedia gets you to wish your life away in anticipation of something that will validate your worth as a person. If you feel lonely and anxious in your work now, then maybe you'll feel better when you get a new project next week or after you get a new job altogether. Of course, the deadlines arrive and pass, or you begin the new job, and you're just as anxious and alone. Soon you're thinking about the next project, or you're on LinkedIn again. We've talked about this sort of in terms of the arrival fallacy. He goes on to say, acedia is so uncomfortable because it's an in-between state, like the liminal space of the waiting room where there's nothing to do but kill time. Acedia's restless activity mimics the go-getter's constant motion, kind of playing nonstop silly games on your phone, yet it produces little, if anything, that has value. Yet the problem with acedia isn't that it's unproductive. The problem, as Josef Pieper, the Catholic philosopher, saw it, is restless anxiety over our lives' worth. Pieper maintains that the contrary of acedia is not the spirit of work or earning one's living. It is man's happy and cheerful affirmation of his own being, his acquiescence in the world and in God. And while Pieper doesn't offer a detailed strategy for winning that battle, he does point us back to the deeper problem, which is the inability to accept grace, whether in creation or election. In the world of capital T, total work, man seems to mistrust everything that is effortless. He can only enjoy with a good conscience what he has acquired with toil and trouble. He refuses to have anything as a gift. Our moral and spiritual task today is to accept our being for the gift it is and acknowledge it in others, to recognize that no one's work determines their worth. Kind of a little bit of a amorphous subject, but I recognize the contours in my own life. Did this resonate with you?
I loved his definition of it. The thing that you read, that acedia gets you to wish your life away in anticipation of something else that's going to validate your worth as a person, something like that. And I totally identify with like the idea that like his like phone and social media is a place where like he turns to, and you know, like, I mean, I like in a bodily way know the feeling he's talking about, where you're like on your phone scrolling, or you're like, I'm just going to check my email one more time, or, and I'm like in this right now, which is probably why I don't want to talk about it. This summer, and he talked about kind of getting away with his wife, what that looked like. And this summer, we got away, and I was very, like, not on my phone. I mean, I texted you guys constantly, but I was, like, not on social media. And I brought that home and was really like, I'm not going to, like, I even started, you know, and this job is really new to me. And I started this year, like, I'm not going to be on my phone after 8 p.m. I'm not going to check my phone until, sorry to my boss who listens to this podcast, 9 a.m. And that's all gone now. We're in October. I'm looking at my phone all the damn time. I wake up at 2 a.m. and I'm like, guess what's on my phone? I don't know. Let's check. Like, it's like constant. You know what I mean? Like, I'm in a constant state of never feeling like I'm going to get everything done, trying to get everything done, don't even know what the everything done is, and looking at my phone. And like all those peaceful vibes, they're gone. I mean, I'm just in it right now, and I don't really have an answer for that, except that I know that there are certain practices that will ground me back in that place. But it's real. I mean, the will is bound, friends. I mean, it is real hard to get myself to do those things. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I felt pretty skewered by this, you know, having the rotation. I mean, I'm not, as we talked about last week, I'm not a big Twitter, Instagram person, Facebook to some degree, but I've got my rotation of sort of sports websites, car blogs, you know, political sites, like just things to distract me from my everyday existence.
Places where you can buy more polo shirts.
Well, exactly. Although I really only own 2, and I have them in heavy rotation until they disintegrate.
Male modeling auditions.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah,
it's no big deal. He's just, Benjamin Button websites. Okay, keep going.
As you guys were talking, it suddenly struck me, because I've been noticing this recently. I think this, with the noonday demon, I think this explains why a lot of men get depressed in August, because they cannot wait for the beginning of football season. Oh. Because football games are perfectly slotted into the noontime demon. You know, it's like you wake up on a Saturday and you have to sort of justify your existence or figure out something to do or keep yourself busy. And you're just like, oh my gosh, when will noon be here? When will 12 o'clock be here? And I can watch a football game and have some sort of sense of belonging and purpose and meaning that will sort of eat up those 3 or 4 hours in the middle of the day. So I think there's really something to that.
Josh, this is a message just for you. Just
for Sarah's
husband.
Josh and I are the only Mockingbird listeners who watch football, so it's just the 2 of us. But I've absolutely noticed. Like, I've been excited for the beginning of football season. I'm like, why is that? Like, oh yeah, because I don't have to figure out how to spend like an entire day where I have nothing to do. Because God knows I do not want to go outside and kick the ball with my 3-year-old for 2 hours. Like, that sounds awful. I need to sit down on a couch and have a little me time. And by me time, I mean time to forget everything and sort of the aching sense of unworthiness that never ends by taking in a little college football, but with teams that I don't even care about.
Right.
Like, like could care less about. Could be a Cowboys-Giants game where, as I say, the only positive outcome is that the stadium explodes and everyone dies. Because I hate because I got my son saying that too. It's like, do I really want to watch the SEC? No, I don't. But I'd rather do that than contemplate my sort of meaningless existence.
Yeah.
Or rather, my anxiety at the need to perform something. So yeah, there was a lot. I felt very skewered, and I felt he was very honest, like sort of shamefully honest in a lot of ways. And I have friends who are college professors. I want to forward this to them and be like, because I'm jealous of them in the summer. They're hanging out at the pool. They're, with their kids, and I'm like, so all summer, do you really just feel an aching sense of lack of achievement? Is that what you're actually feeling?
So here's what I kept wanting him to say in this piece, which is so funny and indicative of like human nature. I kept wanting him to say, but then I got cancer. Like I kept wanting him to be like, you know what I mean? But
such a ray of sunshine, Sarah Connor.
But then I realized I needed to do different and be better. And at the end, he's like, this is always going to be with me. This demon will always be with me. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, not what I was thinking.
Well, that's true, but he also paints this little glimpse of grace that he receives, this sort of moment of accepting. Because the fact that he links this sort of spiritual restlessness that's combined with an emptiness and a boredom, he links it to the refusal to accept grace. Mm-hmm. To accept that you are okay as in that, that our core discomfort with who we are. And RJ, he said it wasn't. He did have friends professors who seemed to enjoy it.
Yeah.
But it was the thinking professions, or the creative ones.
Yes.
You sort of so conflate your identity with what you do. He's like, when I was a college professor, I was a college professor. Mm-hmm. So acedia, I don't know if it's going to catch on as a modern term, but Malaysic writes so much about burnout, and there's one place where he says that we think of more work as the antidote to our acedia, when in fact the culture of total work actually makes the problems that we're trying to outrun in our acedia that much larger. Yeah. Like they create them, and he's constantly railing against this sort of performancism of the seculosity of careerism, however you want to put it. Anyway. Interesting.
I mean, this struck me a little bit, Dave, as a college chaplain, just because the students are in such a similar pattern of like go, 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 and their identity. We both work at these universities with great reputations, and so that they identify with where they are in such a deep way. And it feels like a not small miracle to me when 5 or 6 of them will show up for Bible study. And you get to say, but you're this other thing too. You know what I mean? It's I don't know. Those are miraculous moments for me when we can kind of all acknowledge that, myself included. But just this actually isn't the whole story of who we are. The whole story of who we are is that we've been forgiven and that we're already enough because Jesus is enough. So.
Yeah, the question is not how can I become worthy of this gift. It's what can I do now that I am worthy of this gift. Right. How can that's a fundamentally different question. And maybe I think anyone who you talk to who's been a spiritual person for any length of time will tell you there are moments where you experience some sort of transcendence and gratitude and glimpse of right now being God being with you and it being enough. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of what he describes. And I think he's basically describing a glimpse of heaven. Yeah.
And I do think, this gets in a little bit to another article we're going to talk about today. In my experience, when that happens, it's a surprise. It is a surprise. It's not something you manufacture. You sort of have a wake. You're like, oh wow, I feel good right now. I feel at peace. I feel hopeful about the future. I feel like I don't need to accomplish anything to justify my existence. Again. Sarah, you talk. Maybe there's certain things we can do to bring us a little bit closer to that. I've been reading the Psalms lately, and I gotta say, David whines a lot about sort of the difficulty of his life. I find it very comforting. I'm like, oh, look at him.
David's all and King David, just to be clear. We're talking about both of them.
Yes, both of those. But there is some comfort in seeing these 1,000-year-old words that speak emotions that you're feeling. But then at the same time, like I said, in my experience, when you have those moments of transcendence, they are a surprise, and they come not necessarily at the expected times, and then all you can do is just say thank you.
Yes. Yes,
Well,
because it is remarkable those moments when it's like, I know all my rules are like get enough sleep, don't be on my phone late at night, don't drink, don't have caffeine after lunch. I mean, those are like my basic, like if I want to feel like human again, rules. And
that's a lot of rules. Good for you.
Wow. And I can do those rules and still feel like shit. And then I can feel like shit, and suddenly God's grace intervenes in this radical, unexpected way that like knocks me off of my feet. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so I totally agree.
Well, let's actually then shift into that, because we've came across this remarkable conversation between essayist and writer Leslie Jameson, who spoke at our conference this past year in New York, and the poet Kaveh Akbar. They were talking in the Paris Review, and under the heading "Rigorous Grace." And Kaveh Akbar, sort of one of the things he says, there's a moment in one of the early essays in Leslie's new collection, he says, where you crystallize it, writing, "The definition of grace is that it's not deserved. I have been grappling with this idea in my own life, the notion that if I'm capable of doling out grace only to those obviously deserving of it, it isn't grace exactly. It's kindness, or it's pity, or it's maybe just propriety. What is grace to you, and what can it do?" And then Leslie launches into this unbelievable answer. She says, and I'm going to just quote parts of it, "Part of what grace means to me is you feel the world get larger around you and feel yourself get smaller within it. And the world can get large around you in so many ways. The vending machine of grace is vast, and it never gives you exactly what you asked for. As you, Kaveh, wrote, I live in the gulf between what I've been given and what I've received." And Leslie continues, says, "It makes me think of a beautiful sentiment I once heard from a stranger." And I'm pretty sure she means a stranger in AA. "Sometimes the solution has nothing to do with the problem. I think surprise is an important part of grace. You thought you wanted cookies, but you really needed seltzer. Grace isn't the thing you planned, it's what you get instead, which is maybe connected to the ways you and I want to uncouple it from a sense of contingency or deserving it. Grace is not a product of narrative or moral cause and effect. It catches you off guard." She continues by saying, "My obsession with surprise as a crucial part of grace is connected, I think, with my obsession with thwarted narratives. I'm both boggled and inspired by the ways the plot lines we write for ourselves are always getting overturned. Surprise is sometimes my working definition of God or grace. I've been thinking a lot about this thing that the comedian Kyle Kinane says in one of his stand-up routines, that a miracle is just the world letting you know it can still surprise you. The first time I heard that, I was driving across the Arizona desert in the middle of this pretty surreal, wonderful, uncategorizable fever dream with another person, and I thought, amen. Being surprised means staying humble, means being perpetually reminded of everything you don't know, everything you didn't understand." I love these as sort of a person always looking for fresh language for what we talk about. Surprise as being, and it is. Surprise is never, grace is never what you expect. It's always, it's interruptive. It's, it catches you off guard. My older brother, John Zoll, is always talking about grace and there's always an element of surprise to grace. It's like almost like a surprise party. But it sounds like that, or already sounds like that resonated with you guys. What else are you thinking here in Leslie's words?
It reminded me of this weird Devil Wears Prada. You guys remember that movie with Anne Hathaway and Meryl Streep? Where, if you haven't seen it, Anne Hathaway is this very earnest young college graduate who wants to do serious journalism. And she can only get a job as an intern at this really, high-flying fashion magazine in New York or whatever. And she fights it and she hates it, and terrible relationship with her boss. And then suddenly something happens and she starts to really love it and love her boss and enjoy the work she's doing and find meaning in it. But then at the end, she decides to sort of leave it all behind and go back to her original dream. And I bring that up because I always felt that rung really false to me. That when I sometimes feel strange or guilty for not having like a dream job, or like oh gosh, I just hope that someday I end up here, or this is what I really want to do. This is what I'm aiming for. This is my plan. But I think the reason I don't have that is because I have very little confidence that I actually know what will make me happy. Because in my experience, oftentimes what I think will make me happy doesn't, and then it's the surprising thing that actually does make me happy. And another corollary to that would be, and I hope this doesn't sound too judgy, but it makes me sad when I hear about, young-ish people that are in their early 20s or something who fall in love, and they would have gotten married, but it just wasn't the right time in their career. And I'm like, you have no idea what you're giving up. Like you have no idea what a miracle it is to fall in love in the first place. And why would you risk that for something as small as a career or economics or something? And so I think I think you look for the surprise, and if by God's grace you find something a spot where you're happy, satisfied, or whatever it might be, you just give thanks for it, and you don't sort of still try to work towards something else or what you thought your dream was. Or I think most people do that. I think, right, people start out in their career having a vague idea of what they want to do, and they find themselves doing something maybe related, maybe something totally different, but they stick with the surprise. And I think that's also true for love, that falling in love, falling into the right career, falling into friendships, whatever it might be, it's always a surprise, but that the best things in life are always gifts and not something that we planned for, earned, or strategized to get. So I love that idea.
A thwarted narrative.
That's right. How many times has my narrative been thwarted?
By the grace of God. Many
times. By the grace of God. That's right. Come to find out, he might actually know better than I do.
It reminds me of children. I mean, honestly, because I work full time, and I'm always sort of over-identifying with my work. See, also the last thing we talked about. And kids are always such a source for me. Sometimes I wonder what my source will be, because my kids right now are little, and they say things, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you said that to me. Like last night, Annie told me, my kindergartner, that she wants to be in the school talent show. And I was like, oh, great. And what do you want to sing? And she's like, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, because I know all the words. I was like, amazing. And then I was like, what makes you want to be in the talent show? And she said, because last year when she was a preschooler, they took them to see the school talent show. And she said, and every time people got up to sing, I cried happy tears because it was so beautiful. And I was like, I can't believe I get to raise you. Like, we don't deserve you. It was just like such a powerful.
You didn't expect her to say that. My son a few weeks
ago was having to do this project. The kids get these little, they get little newsletters, kind of thing. Scholastic does them, and they have to write quick question and answers about them. And the whole article, and I'm sure they had it in there because kids would think it was funny. They have not met Neil Condon. And it was a whole little article about the world's ugliest dog. And he was like, Mama, this is the saddest thing I've ever seen. I can't believe that they decide that a dog is ugly. And the thing about this dog is it's really cute. Look at the picture. And I was like, it's like, I can't believe that you're an everyday part of my life that I get to encounter. And they hit me that way over, and I don't know. I think children for me are like that's just like, it's the season I'm in. I mean, I have a really good friend who is such a funny, beautiful, scary, horrible, hard story about having 3 kids, going to the doctor to get her tubes tied last spring. And the doctor was like, yeah, we're happy to do this, but just to be clear, you're going to need to have this baby that's in there first. And she was like, do what? Do what?
Surprise.
And she's like, I have an appointment tomorrow to get my tubes tied. And I hung out with her a lot when she was pregnant, and she was just like, this sucks so bad. I cannot believe we're having a 4th kid. Like, this is a horrible thing, and I'm not excited about it. And then this 4th baby has come, and she's like, I had no idea how much we needed this beauty in our lives. You know what I mean? Like, I had no idea how much this baby would make our family slow down in such a significant way that was so necessary. So anyway, I don't know. I think for me, like, I read this and I think about, and I know not everybody has kids, but I read this and I think about, like, kids, you know? So
that's so beautiful because kids they say the darndest things. And by what we mean by that is usually they surprise you with what they say.
Yeah.
And they catch you off guard. And you kind of get stopped out of whatever program you have for their lives in that moment. And you have to kind of get yanked into the present and actually dealing with them. And it's usually a huge gift. Sometimes not so much.
Sometimes it's
but,
not. Sometimes who wants to watch TV? Yeah.
And let's be frank, sometimes the surprise can be hard.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean it's not good. You know, it may take a little while to kind of figure that out. But and again, we do believe in a God who works in the midst of all things.
And usually when I hear people say, I don't like surprises. Now, they might have had some traumatic thing in their past. But usually what that, to me, is they really like control. And, I mean, who will join the club? We all love control, but that always makes me there's like nothing that makes me more sad than when someone says, I hate surprises. Because I want to say, well, yeah, you're cutting yourself off from a whole lot of things. And yet, I sort of hate surprises, too.
You're not going to be very happy in this life.
This week, I couldn't help but think about it. We saw like two one incredibly powerful instance of grace when we saw the brother, Brant Jean of this murdered young man, get down off the stand and go hug the police officer who had accidentally shot his brother. And he forgives her, and he invites her to know Jesus, and he then kind of gives her this hug. And then you have the actual, after the proceedings are done, then you have the judge, an older black woman, comes down, and also she addresses the family and she speaks with them, and then she goes and gives actually the murderer, Amber, asks for a hug. She gives her a hug, and then she says, could God really forgive me? She says, the judge says, Tammy Kemp says, yes, I do believe so. And she said, but I don't have a Bible. And so she goes and gets her the Bible. All of this is completely surprising, and it went viral, and it gets politicized, and it becomes it comes about groups rather than people. And
we need to get excited about it. Wait, now we have to feel guilty about it.
I get that there are issues. However, what is totally true is that it was a thwarted narrative that we don't see very often, and everyone basically on a gut emotional level freaked out. The same thing happens when Ellen DeGeneres is photographed hanging out at the Dallas Cowboys game with George W. Bush, and everyone freaks out, and she has to, because it's such a surprise that these two, people who are sort of, one is sort of so emblematic of blue state, and one is so emblematic of red state, would be hanging out, and yet it's another surprise. And she uses the opportunity to sort of talk about how she believes in kindness, and he's her friend, and all these things. And people in both cases hate they're all in favor of either revenge or simply justice, and those are to be expected. But what's surprising is when you see grace at work, and I found to myself surprised in both cases. That's not to reduce everything down to these theological terms. However, on a gut emotional level, I found myself crying or being excited because I want to be surprised myself in that same way. That when I am in the dock, that there's a deep emotional connection. If you've ever really screwed up, that our hope is the surprise of grace. You know.
So I actually loved what RJ said about how sometimes grace comes as like an unwelcome surprise. That is hard initially. So. Something I have not talked about before and have not written about before is that I started losing my hair when I was 26 years old. And which, let me tell you, for a woman is like, there's all kinds of statistics where like twice as likely to be on antidepressants. I mean, it's a horrible, horrible thing to go through as a woman because all your femininity is bound up in it. And thanks to Mockingbird, I'm on camera like seasonally now in front of people, terrified that you're going to see how thin my hair is. So, But this past week, I've managed it. There's all kinds of stuff you can go on, but I've managed it and it's fine. And I've got, a short chic haircut. So here we are. But this past week, I'd had a thing removed from my head by the dermatologist. And I was getting my hair cut, and my hairdresser was like, Sarah, what happened to the back of your head? I was like, oh, it's fine. Don't worry about it. And that night, I was putting Annie to bed, my daughter, and I reached my head up, and I was like, wow, it feels real fleshy back there. And I got my husband, till death do us part, to pull out his cell phone and take a picture of a bald patch on the back of my head that is about the size of a quarter, friends. This was on Saturday night. I started having to breathe into a brown paper bag because the next morning I'm preaching to hundreds of people, right? And I'm going through all sort of the things I've dealt with for the past 10 years, dealing with something as bad as hair loss as a very young woman. And I started to laugh. And I couldn't stop because I don't know why God has chosen to do this to me. I have no idea. I know it has created more empathy in me for people who struggle with things about their physicality than I would have ever had. I know it has, humbled me in ways that I wouldn't have been otherwise humbled. And I know it has been this, odd gift. And honestly, I think for any woman that had not gone through what I've gone through the past 10 years, to lose a whole patch of hair the night before you have to get up in front of people would be you just crawl back in bed and be like, we're canceling tomorrow. And for me, I was like, well, of course, this is what's happening. I've been through this before. It was like an odd miracle of grace in that moment. It made me more vulnerable as a preacher. It made me more free in the gospel. It made me more able to realize that it really didn't matter what I look like, and then I was just going to get up in front of people and preach. I think for me, it was this odd, very personal moment of grace. Dave, I have to tell you, I've almost written about this because I was really grappling. The thing with hair loss is it can get really bad and then it can get better. It can get really bad and it can get better. And you wrote a piece right when I was starting to write for Mockingbird called Your Soul Toupee is Showing. And I was like, but what if I have a real toupee? That I'm hiding from everyone because this is the worst, So anyway, that was
bad surprise, but
a bad surprise, but also one where I learned so much about, I don't know, how much God loves me, where my value lies, all those really hard lessons to learn. So,
yeah, and for those, I don't know, for those people for whom that's a strange message, I'll quote a little scripture here because it reminds me of one of my favorite passages, Romans 8. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but of the will of the one who created it, in the hopes that it would be liberated from its bondage to decay and enter into the glorious freedom of the children of light. That you're losing your hair because God wants you to be free.
Right.
That sounds really insane to say.
It does, but
it's kind of true.
So much comfort there.
Yeah, it's not your fault.
No.
It's not. It's part. It's the whole Stephen
those
Colbert thing we talked
multivitamins are not going to help, sis.
Not,
you know what I mean?
Not why me, but why not me? And guess what? God's going to work through that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a strange lead-in, I guess, to this, or maybe it's perfectly suiting to this final remarkable essay that we came across in the Christian Century, that by Heidi Haverkamp, and she's an Episcopal minister, and she wrote this article called "How I Learned to Love Total Depravity," which, if you read Christian Century, it's not the sort of thing you're expecting to find there. And she recounts, her family's history, and her, I think it's her grandfather's or great grandfather's. It was a Presbyterian minister, a very capital R Reformed, and extremely, very much convinced of this doctrine of total depravity, which is, a doctrine which, I guess triggers people, you could say.
Not terribly popular in the present moment.
No, and it's, I think it's widely misunderstood, and yet still the total part is, I would just drop that word, but this is what she says, and let her speak for herself, because it's remarkable in its, precision and also its humor and personality. She says, in the university neighborhood where I grew up, it was a well-established orthodoxy that people are basically good, and the best sort of life is lived trying to make the world a better place. The question was never, why did God allow bad things to happen, but why do human beings allow them to happen? Then she writes, as an adult and a Christian, I want to do the right thing. I keep mental lists of how I want to live more responsibly, eat less meat, buy less plastic, reduce my carbon footprint, speak up about racism, give to charities. But it never seems like enough.
Not sleep. Yeah, keep going.
Social media, social media is always ready to help me count the ways I could do more, leaving me feeling more guilty than righteous, unable to keep up. As Paul writes, I can will what is right, but I cannot do it. And that's Romans 7. At least not consistently or very effectively. We're back to Heidi Haverkamp. No matter what I do or how hard I try to be righteous, the world spins me to my knees at every turn with more evidence of cruelty, catastrophe, and waste. I do not feel theologically equipped to handle the enormous weight of evil I see in the world. After all, I was raised to believe that human beings are capable of stopping it. And then she talks about total depravity and this doctrine. She says, total depravity frames humans not as good people who sometimes mess up, but as messed up people who, with God's help, can do some good things, but nothing completely free of selfishness or error. We are unable to make a choice that is unquestionably entirely good. None of our actions, loves, or thoughts can be truly without sin. But she says something remarkable. She says, I find a surprising grace in the bleak, unflinching outlook of my Calvinist heritage.
Yes, Heidi, start listening to it. I love it.
Total depravity matches the sin-sized hole in my belly in a way that, quote, all people are basically good, end of quote, never could. Total depravity speaks to sin in our personal lives. More importantly for me, it also gives theological definition to corporate and societal sins. It's not just that I am unable to love everyone I meet or to live a life that is plastics-free. I have also found it impossible to untangle my individual life from systems of injustice. A contemporary Episcopal prayer of confession includes the line, we repent of the evil we have done and the evil done on our behalf. There is a lot of suffering and a lot of evil in this world, and I find I cannot consider myself entirely innocent of it. And then she closes with this, or actually she closes this section. She says, when unreasonable, unremitting human sin is something I expect, then I can face the headwinds of evil without despair. When I believe that human life, including my own, will never be without sin and suffering, I have a greater ability to tolerate pain and horror and to keep on doing justice, loving kindness, and walking humbly. I can, as Anne Lamott would say, keep singing hallelujah and looking for grace anyway. I mean,
That's so good.
I'm very touched by what she says. The original sin. I mean, I would just call it original sin rather than total depravity. But the idea that nothing we do is ever totally pure or purely good. It is an unpopular idea, but what it births, what she says is tolerance, and it births also compassion, and not only for other people but for oneself. It is. To say nothing of it reduces the cognitive dissonance that you have to, if you have what we call inflated anthropology, or this idea that people are basically good, then you're constantly having to explain away all of the evidence that streams across your radar just every second, including your own internal monologue. That's a lot of dissonance to have to reconcile within yourself.
I mean, you just have to ignore poor people, right? I mean, there's like all sorts of things. I mean, just to name it. It's such a...
And rich people, to be honest with you.
You have to ignore...
everybody.
I mean, when I read this, I mean, I really identified with the way she kind of talked about the theology of her childhood, because I do think that that's a very, I mean, that really runs steadily through mainline Protestantism and has now for several decades, where it's just like, we're going to build the kingdom, we're going to be kingdom makers. I mean,
kingdom makers.
This is the generation.
This is the generation, right? We're going to solve world hunger,
all wrongs.
Millennium Development Goals. I mean, it's just like a bunch of things we could say that have not worked out at all.
Not yet, Sarah, but come on.
Oh my
You're just being too
word.
pessimistic.
I know. It's just like, it's
she's able to, because she comes from an inflated anthropology,
Yes.
she can sort of discover the beauty of a low one. But if you come from a one where total depravity has basically been used as a vehicle of self-loathing, then you run in the opposite direction, and you want to embrace a high anthropology, which again has embedded within it the cruelties that we have been talking about, and that she actually, because you will come to hate people if you expect them to be better than they actually are capable of being. They just
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I think about how many people I know who just got ordained with me who are not in ordained ministry anymore. I mean, seriously, like when you are handed the stuff that we hear in a lot of mainline Protestant circles about making people better. And I just, the thing I always say is like, y'all, if this was the trajectory, we would all be better by now. We've been trying to make people better now for a while, and people just seem to keep getting worse. It is that whole idea of why I think a low anthropology is like necessary. And, one thing I've noticed is people are starting in some circles, I see, and praise God for this, to talk this way and to talk about low anthropology. But here is the problem. You have to talk about it for yourself before you talk about it for anybody else. And Heidi really does a beautiful job of that in this piece. I think that is, for me, that is the most important thing. And I mean, this is the stuff, this piece I related to. She had a great grandfather who was the person that she could kind of lean on and find an identity in terms of thinking about total depravity or, original sin or low anthropology, whatever you want to call it. I had Mockingbird. I mean, that really is like, that Mockingbird saved my life and my ministry. I would not be in ministry right now if I had not heard that I was going to be fully armed with, all of this knowledge about how to plant urban community gardens and also how to, protest climate change or whatever. I was going to go out and I was going to do these things. And like just at the end of seminary, somebody told me about Mockingbird. And I was like, wait, what? Wait, I'm gonna go out there and everybody's gonna be fallen and I'm fallen and they're gonna need redemption and they're gonna need to hear about the gospel. And oh wait, Jacob Smith just this week, my husband and I were talking about this, just this week on Same Old Song, preached to me because he said, so often in mainline Protestantism or just in the church in general, we hear people say, what is the gospel? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbors yourself. And he's like, that's the law. That's the law. That's the great commandment. But we have so twisted it, that we give people this impossible charge. And here's the thing, it will burn people out. That is the thing. If your heart's mechanism is that you have to be in this place of, I've got to get it together, I've got to love people, I've got to love God, you will fail, you will drop out of ministry, you will be able to plant tomatoes. So that is good news. You know what I mean? You can make your own salsa.
You'll drop out of the pews too.
Yes. It's just it kills you. But if your starting point is like, I need Jesus, I can't get out of bed in the morning without him. And also like, I'm going to fail at everything before I even like walk outside. Then there's like the grace and mercy of that. I don't know. It's just different. I feel like this is a repeat of last week. Sorry. I don't mean to sermonize to y'all, but this piece really was so, I feel like she and I just are like, I feel like
besties.
I feel like we're kin, but not building the kingdom. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Dave, you sort of just put something together for me that I hadn't thought about before, which is there probably are a lot of people out there, especially people who were raised Christian, who are trying to remain Christian, who were raised in environments where total depravity was a thing. Yeah. But that doctrine was used as an excuse and justification for control.
Yes.
Rather than living in the light, humility, repentance, mercy, forgiveness, restoration, grace, that sort of thing. But of course, that's also true on the other side of the coin, right? That if you think highly of people and you're using it as a way to, or justification to try to control them, that's not going to work out well. Or if you think, lowly of people and try to control them, also not going to work out well. And there is something in...
Even if you think part of that lowliness is their propensity to try to control other people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there is something in Christianity or Christian ministry, I think, where you sort of do want to treat people as better than they are, right? You want to impute unto them some kind of loveliness, or that there's something, when someone expects the best of you in a loving, gracious way, it actually does bring out the best in you, and so, I don't know, those are interesting things to kind of balance out, right? To just sort of know in your heart of hearts at the end of the day, hopefully not to be surprised when someone falls into some sin. There's a group of clergy, and I have sort of a running joke that when something happens in one of our church, it's like, well, just when you thought your anthropology was low enough,
right.
So-and-so went and did this.
Right.
So you want to know that about people enough to love them, but you also want to sort of treat them as being lovely, because that that sort of ennobles them. Or when you're loved, you tend to act in a more lovely way. So I don't know what the balance is there, but there's something definitely about control. And as a person in the world, as a parent, as a spouse, as a friend, as a pastor, if you are looking to control other people in any way, which of course we all are, you're probably on the wrong track. And again, I think I've said this before, it reminds me, I think Tom Becker said this once. He said, that in AA, any need to control another person is taken as a sign of a lack of faith. Because if you actually believed in God, if you actually believed in a higher power to whom you could turn things over and was actually in control, you would not feel the need to sort of tell other people what to do. You could entrust them to God in the way that they'd entrust themselves to God. So that's not a quite fully formed thought.
I think in Grace and Practice, my dad has a thing about good ministers like Mr. Magoo. They sort of,
yes.
they're kind of blind to, they completely know what people are like, but they kind of are blind to the sin, and they try to treat the person, they impute constantly in a way that doesn't necessarily ring false if it's rooted in your belief in Christ. It's not a different kind of manipulation, because that's sometimes how it gets understood.
Well, it's like you impute to someone you're in love with.
Yes.
Same sort of thing. Or Dave preached a wonderful wedding homily this past weekend where he talked about the key to marriage is treating your spouse as if they're a little child, which sounds strange, but not that you try to control them, but when they screw up, you don't say, oh, you should have known better. Get your act together. Although, of course, some parents say that to their children, but hopefully not to a little child. Yeah. You kind of laugh a little bit and love them and comfort them and move on.
There's a generosity, which is your baseline,
yes.
Even though you fully see what they actually just did, and
Right.
you're usually the one to have to deal with the consequences.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you think, oh my gosh, they must have not gotten enough sleep last night. But
that being said, I understand the allergy to total depravity if it was used as a weapon against you. But when I think about that doctrine, the way it shows up in the New Testament and in the lives of ministers of the gospel, it's not used as a weapon. It's used as, a way in, an act of mercy, a way to love, a way to accept in spite of people's disastrous realities.
I also think it's important to say about imputation, because I see this done sometimes. Imputation is not meant to make people better. It's meant to tell people.
That's control too.
It's meant to tell people that they're whole. That is, I mean, that it's because I think the fascinating thing to me about sort of all of these like major theological concepts is that they can be misused by the right or the left in the church. And I just think there's danger on either end. So that's why the gospel's so uncomfortable, y'all.
Yeah, and ultimately I mean, I don't know what to say except for my hope lies in the judge getting off the bench and coming down to give me a hug.
Holy goodness. You want to talk about a biblical vision?
That I am guilty as charged, and in fact, probably more guilty than I or anyone in that courtroom know. That is because that's what usually when we talk about grace and we talk about forgiveness, people they only hear it in terms of the law. Like, you must now do this to every murderer or every time there's been a shooting, or every time such and such. Where we as Christians, we think of ourselves as the person who's the perpetrator. What does it say to the guilty party? How do we hear it if we actually believe what Heidi Haverkamp says about us, that not only are we involved in systems of sin, but that we're complicit in them, and we cannot untangle ourselves from them, that we need deliverance, we need pardon, we need redemption, we need all of the things that we cannot really generate, the pure motives that we cannot seem to manufacture.
I mean, I have to say, like, when I saw the story about Brant Jean forgiving the woman, I can't remember her name right off the top of my head, but forgiving the woman who murdered his
Amber
brother.
Geiger. Yeah.
Amber Geiger, forgiving Amber Geiger. I was like, wow, this feels like the prodigal son. I mean, this feels like that welcome, like that welcome home embrace. And I think the thing about that story that is very important is that everyone was focused on, like, I can't believe he forgive her. And I'm like, let's talk about the radical idea that he, and Dave, you pointed this out, but invited her to a life in Christ. I mean, that really is important. But when I think about the judge, and the judge image is so biblical, right? I'm sitting here, I'm like, what does that remind me of? And it's the conversion of St. Paul. Because it's this like murderous person, right? Who is, and we know from Amber Geiger's social media, she's super racist, right? There were these people that she hated because they were not of her quote unquote tribe.
She was persecuting.
And God comes to Paul and is like, you belong to me now. Like, you are forgiven and loved, and you belong to me now. And the difference between us and the people in the story of Paul, the difference between the us now and the disciples is that the thing with that story that is bananas,
surprising,
is that everybody around, so all the disciples, these early Christians, they're like initially hesitant, and then they're like, well, he's one of ours now, like pretty quickly. You know what I mean? It's so beautiful. And now it's like, we just want to cast, we continue to want, I feel like not only do we want to cast Amber Geiger into outer darkness, but you know what? If we could throw that brother and that judge back there, that'd be good too. I mean, that's what it feels like. Like, by the way, you're not allowed to forgive anybody, and we're going to ban you for that.
I couldn't believe that I guess I could totally believe, but I was so grateful that we could just be exposed to this and just sit in it. Let's just sit in it. Anyway, any final thoughts before we sign off? RJ, nothing?
Go Astros.
Well, I'm grateful for you two, for both of you. And we'll talk to you again in a couple weeks.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by the Narrativo Group, and if you like what you've heard, please do drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Until next time.
Praise the Lord.